Hi, my name is Kel and I'm a therapist and educator with a special interest in eating disorders. Come on in, take a seat, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe for bite-sized content across the mental health and eating disorder spectrum. In today's video, I'm going to be answering another viewer's question. This one came in via email and the individual wanted to know if we're not using BMI as a way of measuring client progress, then is there something else that we can use? Is there another way to measure progress in eating disorder recovery? This question is obviously a bit of an addition to some previous videos that I've made. Those videos are about the BMI calculation and also the video about why I don't weigh clients with eating disorders in my private practice. So if you haven't already seen those videos, this video is going to make far more sense if you go and watch those first. So I'm going to leave a link to those now. Going to either be right on the screen or in the description box. So go ahead, pause this video and go watch those videos first and then come back here. Okay, so if you're still with me or if you've just come back, then you hopefully have already consumed the information in those other videos and understand the starting point for today's video in thinking about if we don't use BMI, then how might we measure client progress, or what other tool might we use to determine progress in eating disorder recovery? I think we have to start by thinking what it is that we were attempting to measure if we were using BMI in the past, if we were using the client's weight in the past as a way of determining eating disorder recovery. Were we using BMI as a way of measuring medical need? Or were we using it as a way of measuring severity of illness, rate of recovery, or perhaps whether or not recovery has been achieved? Potentially all of those factors, I guess. So if we take the first of those, which was medical need, as you will have heard me say in those previous videos, I'm not a medical professional, I'm a talking therapist. And I do not believe that looking after an individual's physical health is my responsibility. That is something that is important for me to pass on to appropriate medical professionals who have those skills and who can also, I believe, help facilitate the care of the person with an eating disorder by separating out the physical health and the mental health and letting us do our respective jobs. So that isn't to say that I completely ignore clients' physical health, because that wouldn't be very sensible either, but I essentially go by the rule, if something has changed, get it checked out, which seems pretty simple. So in that sense, the only measure I need is, has something changed? Yes, please go back to your medical provider and get that checked out. So no tools used in terms of that. But in terms of severity, is there a tool I might use there? Well, I'm not going to be looking at severity from a physical health basis, but I might be, I guess, thinking about severity from a psychological perspective in terms of how much support the individual that I'm working with might benefit from. Of course, I simply could ask them how much support they think would be useful to them, because severity of illness is not necessarily something that correlates with the amount of support or the length of time somebody stays in therapy. And in that sense, the only way thinking about severity is helpful to me is the severity of your eating disorder reducing over time? So we could use any of a plethora of eating disorder symptom checkers and questionnaires as a way of determining severity. We could use questionnaires and then score, if you like, kind of seems like a bit of a perverse word to use in this context, but score the severity of the symptoms. The most commonly used and often, I guess, considered gold standard option here would be the EDE or the EDEQ. That's the Eating Disorder Examination or the Eating Disorder Examination Questionnaire. So the Eating Disorder Examination is a clinically given interview, a semi-structured interview, and more commonly we as talking therapists, so outside of psychology and psychiatry, would be more likely to use the EDEQ, the Eating Disorder Examination Questionnaire, which is a 28-point self-report questionnaire that the client or you along with the client can go through and score the severity of symptoms. Often these types of questionnaires are based on either frequency of an individual's behaviour or their feeling about the severity of the behaviour. And the EDEQ is absolutely not the only one. In fact, if you go grab just about any eating disorder recovery workbook or anything along those lines, then you'll find that there's probably a version of a questionnaire within the first chapter. I don't use as standard in my practice a specific one of these, and in some instances I don't use any of them. But what I might do is, if a client indicates that using a measure like that might be helpful to them, then we might have a look at what the options might be. I might have a look at a couple of them and think about which asks questions that are more meaningful to this individual client. And of course, you also heard me there say that I might and that I would ask the client. So I guess I want to add in here indication that measuring symptoms and symptom severity and symptom reduction in that sense isn't about information for me as the therapist, but is about what is helpful for the client in terms of making sense of their experience. And that's something that for me as a humanistic based therapist is important to the way that I practice with clients. We could then also use those same questionnaires over periods of time, maybe repeating the questionnaire at a particular frequency or when the client felt it, to determine if things were worsening or improving. So essentially he would just repeat the questionnaire and see what the score was now versus the previous time. And if we were using something like that, we might assume that a very low score, a score of just a couple of points, would be indication that full recovery had been achieved. So that's one way, that's an alternative to looking at how we might measure the experience of somebody with an eating disorder. I do sometimes use those questionnaires in my practice, but more often than not, I actually don't. More often than not, I have conversations with my clients in the beginning of their therapy journey and think about what it is that they're bringing to therapy. What are their goals and how would we know when they'd been achieved? What are the things that are important to them? And how would we determine that we were moving towards those, or that they were getting to experience more of that in their life? And we might think about ways of putting that on a scale, or we might just think about asking the client to reflect on how they feel or think about it on a regular basis. So just simply using therapy goals and keeping note of those, either me keeping note of them or the client keeping note of them, and revisiting those on a semi-occasional basis to check that we're keeping on track, that we're working towards that in a way that's helpful to the client, and that the client is indeed working towards that. And if not, is that because that isn't as important to them as they thought it was, or is that because maybe we've got off track a little bit? And I guess what I'm saying is that even in working with eating disorders, I'm working in a far less concrete way than specifically always measuring a client's physical health with BMI and measuring a client's symptoms with, let's say, the EDEQ. I might use the EDEQ, but it's not something that I strictly utilise in my practice because I don't feel a need to be measuring my client's progress. I want to trust what it is that the client is sharing with me, and I want to trust to some degree what I'm feeling too, and then checking that out with the client as to, does this feel helpful? Are we moving in a direction that is meaningful to you? Therapy in that sense ends when the client tells me that they're ready for therapy to end, and that might be because their goals have been achieved, or maybe their goals are achieved and we make new goals and we start working towards those too. Or it might just be that they feel like they've got some more tools to continue to work towards achieving those points of recovery independently or more independently outside of therapy and not while working with me. and that's absolutely fine too. I wonder if talking about this in this way is helpful and has helped you think about maybe what it is that you're presently doing in your practice and whether or not that is what you want to continue to do. Maybe is that what your clients would be best helped by? I'm in no way saying that the way that I manage this in my practice is the right way to do it or the best way to do it or the way that you should do it. I'm just sharing my experience and my way of doing it, and it's open here for us to talk about if you want to give me some reflections and feedback in the comment section, and for you to take away and try if this isn't how you're currently working and you think it might be something you'd like to consider in your practice. As always, I would love to hear questions and topics that you have in mind for future videos. I'd really appreciate it if you'd give this video a thumbs up and share it with another professional or colleague who might find it beneficial. Until next time, be kind, be curious, be yourself.